The Dust Bowl. History. It was the worst environmental disaster in U.S. history, resulting from years of unsustainable agriculture that corroded lands and destroyed native grasslands that held soils in place. Drought and soil erosion were two main culprits. Rainfall was maybe 10 inches per year for the decade. It represented a drop of as much as 25 inches a year. When compared to times in the 1920s, nearly all farmers used a mold-board plow, which went down about 6 to 8 inches. What happened to the people? People caught in their own yards groped for the doorstep. Cars came to a standstill, for no light in the world could penetrate that swirling muck. They lived with the dust, ate it, slept with it, watched it, stripped various of possessions in the hope of possessions. Once they reached California, these displaced laborers often pushed African Americans and Asian Americans out of their jobs. Timeline: 1931 to 1931. Severe drought hits the Midwestern and Southern plains as the crops die. The black blizzard begins. The dust from the overplowed and overgrazing land begins to blow. 1932. The number of dust storms is increasing. 14 are reporting this year. Next year there will be 38. May 12th. The Farm Credit Act of 1933 established a local bank and set up local credit associations. May 1934. The drought is the worst ever in U.S. history, covered more than 75% of the country and affected 27 states severely. January 15, 1935. The federal government forms a drought relief service to coordinate relief activities. How and when the government addressed the situation and how to prevent something like this from happening. The act, which established the Social Conservation Service, sought to control floods, prevent imperilment and reservoirs, and maintain the navigability of rivers and harbors, protect public health, public lands, and receive unemployment. It gave farmers subsidies to plant native grasses and trees or raise vegetables, rather than commercial crops that depleted social nutrition. In the law, Congress was responding to the fierce dust storms that stripped away millions of tons of arid soil, loosened after years of rapid homesteading and commercial agriculture. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s lasted about a decade. The primary area affected was the southern plains. The northern plains were not hit so badly, but the drought and the blowing dust and the decline of agriculture in the region had a nationwide effect. The loss of agriculture production helped to lengthen the depression, not only in the U.S. but worldwide. The displaced farmers became migrants, described in John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. Families from Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Nevada, and Arkansas packed what they could in cars and trucks and headed west. Most were aiming for California, where they would become a class of migrant farmers. Following the crops during the harvest season, poor farmer techniques and years of depleting the soil led to the soil becoming susceptible to the winds, and when the winds came, the soil was picked up and day became night. Drought had come in the early 1930s. Farmers had to endure great dust storms, called the Black Blizzards, that blotted out sunlight and swept away farmland. The Great Plains became a dust bowl, and thousands of Americans watched as the crops failed. The Dust Bowl spanned parts of 6 states in the southern plains. Wind erosion wore away soil beds in Nebraska and Dakotas as well. Dirt from those areas swept east after the Mississippi River, far enough to darken the skies over New York and Washington. In the face of drought and low prices of their crops, thousands of Dust Bowl farmers lost their farms. Many headed west to California to look for work. Once they reached California, these displaced laborers often pushed African Americans and Asian Americans out of their jobs. During the Great Depression, an 8-year drought struck the Great Plains in the United States. The drought, coupled with soil erosion, caused massive dust storms. The area, which became called the Dust Bowl, became nearly uninhabitable. As dust piled up like snow outside homes, people who breathed in the massive amounts of dust often came down with respiratory illness, called the Brown Plague. When FDR came into office, he also implemented a program in which the government bought these farmers' starving livestock in order to butcher these still eligible to feed the homeless in the Hoovervilles. The 12 earned from every cattle sold was soon the only source of income for many. A single storm generated enough static electricity to short radios and cars and cause blue flames to erupt from barbed wire fences. It was so strong it even knocked full-grown men off their feet. They actually touched or shook hands. People would drag chains in order to offset the static electricity. On Black Tuesday, enough static electricity was produced to power New York City. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s lasted about a decade. Its primary area of impact was on the southern plains. The northern plains were not so badly affected, but nonetheless, the drought, wind-blown dust, and agriculture decline were no strangers to the north. In fact, the agriculture devastation helped to lengthen the Depression, whose effects were felt worldwide. The movement of people in the plains were also profound. The end.